You're Missing Out is sponsored by Audible. As part of my New Year's resolution, I told myself I'd read more and listen to new audiobooks. With Audible, it's easier than ever to find titles and time in my routine to reach my goal. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, as well as access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. Right now, you can visit audibletrial.com/YMO podcast and get 2 audiobooks on behalf of the show. You can download thousands of different titles and listen offline, anytime, anywhere. Download the free Audible app on your favorite smartphone and tablet devices without ever losing your spot. Having a hard time deciding what to listen to? No worries. You can keep your credits for up to a year and use them to binge on a whole series if you'd like. This is the best way to find a new title to fall in love with, all while supporting your favorite National Film Registry podcast. Once again, that's audibletrial.com/YMO podcast to start your free trial and get 2 free audiobooks on us. Thank you for your support.
And now, on with the show.
All right, gentlemen. What's your favorite use of one movie within another?
I thought about this for a bit. Part of me, leans toward some of the obvious ones, like The Sorrow and the Pity and Annie Hall as a gag. But the truth is, my favorite, hands down, is in Jean-Luc Godard's Vivre sa vie, which is an incredible film. At one point, Anna Karina's character goes to the cinema to see The Passion of Joan of Arc. Now, the scene is not quite as you remember it. I remember in my mind, I kind of remember it as cutting back and forth between that incredible close-up of Joan of Arc's face with the tear and the close-up of Anna Karina's face watching it and what that says about what she's feeling. In fact, ultimately, it only cuts to Karina twice in that scene or so. Instead, you're watching a whole big chunk of Passion of Joan of Arc play out to the point where you're kind of thinking, is this some kind of, like when they show Attack of the Crab Monsters in Shopping Mall just to pad out the runtime. But then it cuts back to Karina at just the right time so that cutting to her fits with the rhythm of the editing of the film. That the way it cuts from the guards to Joan of Arc in that same rhythm, it then cuts to Karina watching it. And it's the closest you can feel to conveying an audience member getting lost in a film without going full Purple Rose of Cairo, Sherlock Jr. walk into the screen. The way that it cuts to Karina and the way it frames her face the same as Joan of Arc, it conveys her becoming one with the film and a part of it. And I think that's such an incredible thing to convey. So my favorite use of one film and another is Passion of Joan of Arc in Godard's Vivre sa vie. If folks haven't seen it, I believe it's on HBO Max, at least as we record this.
My pick, once I got this question sent to me, was kind of came to me pretty quick. And it is the use of Halloween at the end of Scream, when all of the characters are watching their movies and then the big bloodbath happens and the TV's still on as the movie's ending and all the twists and turns are coming, and you've just got the John Carpenter scores just playing in the background. There's moments where like that movie turns in on Scream, like, you got Jamie Kennedy is watching the movie and he's, there's a camera on him. He doesn't realize watching him watch the movie, and he doesn't know the killer's behind him. And he's saying, "Jamie, behind you. He's behind you, Jamie." That brilliant way of connecting this meta movie that's all about slashers and how people watch slashers and all that stuff, and just connecting the thread and putting it all, just putting a nice bow on top of that little meta package. It's a pretty deft use of all that, of editing it into the movie and making it all work, and how the movie climaxes is Halloween's climax. It's just the best, and I think I think that's my favorite use of a movie within another movie. It's pretty ingenious, to be honest.
Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, the other half of Podcasts Like It's 1999 returns with his tap shoes. Kenny Neibart is back to discuss 1935's Top Hat.
Our guest today, in addition to being the co-host of podcasts like It's 1999, is the co-executive producer of Step Up on Stars. Here to talk about Top Hat is Kenny Neibart. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure having Kenny back. It's been so long. God, it's only been like about a week since I last talked to you.
That's true.
Well, it's also worth noting, you know, technically in one sense, this is Kenny's second appearance on our show. In another sense, he will have innumerable appearances because Kenny has the distinction of being one of the vocalists on our theme song.
Thank you guys for doing that. That was the moment when I felt like I really made it as a podcaster. So
We're here to give everyone their breaks.
look. You want to know how fucking proud I was of that? I played it for my wife.
Really?
I'm like, listen to how smart I sound. I sound so smart. So you know, you put a good score behind it. You have these great images, and then you have my voice saying, I don't like that. Doesn't sound like something I would say, but I just, you know, I say a lot of stuff. I just talk and talk and talk. So thank you guys. That really made my day. And I really needed it.
Yeah, and what you're saying in that segment, it rhymes and it's over a beat, so that our theme song is technically your rap debut. Am I correct?
Nope, you're not correct. Definitely not my rap debut. Just another single I've dropped.
Oh,
Kenny is currently living under the stadium with Kanye.
Yeah.
If Kanye is Lon Chaney, Phil is Claude Rains.
So if you guys want to get problematic right away,
I'm always
Oh
down.
God.
that wasn't that problematic. But I was in a band in college and I was the singer. And as a singer in a band, in a bar band, this was in the early 2000s, we had a pretty eclectic set list. So we would do things like we would do a lot of stuff you would do at a bar. We do Pearl Jam, and we would do jam bands, and we would do whatever. But we would do Devil Came Down to Georgia, which is, you know, largely spoken, and we also did Lose Yourself. So there is somewhere in the world on the internet me rapping Lose Yourself. So that would be my debut.
Well, surely, and some Rage covers. I think you talked about your band on the Rage Against the Machine episode.
That's true. We also did Killing in the Name of. That's right. Yeah. So those are the three rap tracks I have. Killing the Name of, Devil Went Down to Georgia, and Lose Yourself. You can find them anywhere you can stream shit from 2004.
It's a hell of a trilogy there.
Yeah.
and from your musical past, you're here to talk about a musical. That's about as good a transition as I could possibly pull from that one.
That's right. That's like the guy with the Segway went over the bridge.
We
over the cliff.
We when I sent you the list of films to talk about, I wasn't sure what you were going to pick, and then you picked out Top Hat in part because of your own experience as a writer on Step Up on Stars.
Yes, I'm a dance writer. There are very few of us. So I thought, I think you and I, Mike, we just kind of thought that it might be right for me being a dance writer to write about one of, you know, it's not necessarily one of the early dance pictures. Obviously, dance, a visual thing that, you know, you don't even need talking for, has been around since the beginning of the medium. But it's one of the earliest ones that made the registry. And I thought that was something I could potentially bring my perspective to. Now that I've watched the movie, I can't. I have nothing for you guys. So it's
oh boy. So you had not seen Top Hat before, is what you're saying?
No, you know what? I've not seen most of these. So the Astair Rogers ones are RKO musicals. I've seen a lot of MGM stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So Astair did some MGM stuff after his RKO deal was over. I think that was in the early 40s or whatever. And so I really had never seen a Astair Rogers film. I've seen the performance, right? I've seen Cheek to Cheek. I've seen Day and Night, which I think is amazing. And I think that I think that what's cool about Astaire and Rogers in particular is Rogers. I think like she really like it. The saying about how she did everything Fred Astaire did backwards and in heels has become almost meaningless now. But she's really what I think your eye is drawn to in these movies, or at least for me. So yeah, I look, I love this stuff. I really love the Busby Berkeley stuff. This is different, and we can talk about that.
Well, we're gonna get into that because this ends up being kind of a fulcrum point for dance on film and the film musical. But before we get into all that, let's talk about why the registry picked Top Hat. The fourth pairing of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and the first with a screenplay written specifically for them, Top Hat is the quintessential Astaire Rogers musical, complete with a contrived story of mistaken identity, romance, dapper outfits, Art Deco sets, plenty of dazzling dance numbers, and an array of wonderful songs, including perhaps the most famous Astaire Rogers duet, Cheek to Cheek. This effervescent musical proved the perfect tonic for Depression-era audiences, even if it was merely a reworking of the dance team's earlier The Gay Divorcee. So that's what the registry had to say about Top Hat. So, Kenny, this was your first time watching Top Hat. Tom, this was sort of your first time watching Top Hat, right? I mean, you watched it in prep for the show, but you watched it first about a month ago, something like that?
Yeah, no, I watched it about a month ago because my plan was, I plan and the world laughs at me, was to try to watch everything early and then have a second viewing before we recorded. But yeah, so I did manage to get this one in about a month ago. This was my first just Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movie in general. Musicals and the like, as we've said before on the Singing in the Rain episode, big blind spot for me personally. As I'm watching them, yeah, I'm getting more into them, and I'm excited to get more into them as this show goes on, and just in general, because I think I bought a shit ton at that last Warner Archive sale, just like, oh, we're not doing the sale anymore. So I'm like, all right, I spent $800 on Blu-rays, so I'm pretty sure there's at least a musical or two in there. But yeah, but as I'm finding out, watching it the first time, not my first time dealing with Top Hat content in general. As we'll get into, I'm sure.
Yeah, let me for those listening who don't know, or maybe you don't have one in your town, or maybe you did and it's gone now. The Alamo Drafthouse always plays a little "Don't talk, don't make any noise" thing prior to the film. But one of the clips they use to tell you not to talk is they use the opening scene of Top Hat with all the gentlemen sitting in the stuffy London club, not making any noise, and then concluding with Astaire doing the big tap dance in the doorway to piss them all off.
The big fuck you tap
Which,
dance.
listen,
Yes.
which I'm all for. Tell every stuffy British man you find to go fuck themselves.
With a tap
But
dance.
then again, with the tap dance, or just as creatively as you can. We all got our own unique talents. But then again, it is counterbalanced on my end with them just taking Italians out back and putting one behind their ear.
Oh, well, you mean are either of you gentlemen aware of the fact that this movie was banned in Italy?
Yeah, and I don't blame them. One time, broken clocks were right twice a day. Mussolini was right banning this movie.
Oh my god.
So wait,
So-
Tom, you think this movie sucks?
No, I don't think it sucks. I'm just joking because it really does make Italians look like the biggest fucking dopes in the world.
Well, that's always funny. This and The Gay Divorcee, with the same actor playing the same type of Italian role, were both banned in Italy for what they felt was a derogatory portrait of Italians.
Fair.
I always find that funny because I find kind of now the modern day Italian stereotypes are all like, it's all mob stuff. It's all Sopranos stuff, right? It's all stereotypical Italian American, macho, overly macho. I always laugh anytime you see this like earlier sort of turn of the century idea of the Italians as this sort of effete,
Fops.
I believe, yeah, yes. One of my favorites is I don't know if you know this, Kenny. I had a friend of mine's French and told me that in France, Pepe Le Pew isn't French;
Oh, no.
he's Italian.
No, I didn't know that.
Because apparently she was saying that the whole amorous creep stereotype that we all apply to the French because of Chevalier and all that, they apply to the Italians.
That's interesting.
But so this is a pivotal one we were talking about, and Tom hinted at having seen parts of the film before. One of the key things about this movie, and I think part of what aids its longevity, is obviously there were 10 Astair Rogers pairings, most of which were in the 30s. You get one in 49, the Berkeley's of Broadway, which is the only MGM one. The rest are
So many
RKO.
goddamn sequels.
Well, it's an interesting thing.
Hollywood and their goddamn sequels.
It is an interesting thing to me insofar as so there were 10 of these films. This is the one that, if people know one, they probably know most of the scenes, because a lot of elements from this film, particularly Cheek to Cheek and Top Hat and Tails, get repeated or explicitly shown in other films. You know, it's obviously a pivotal piece of The Green Mile. Wow, I just completely blanked on the other film I was thinking of. Cheek to Cheek is shown in Purple Rose of Cairo. Also shows up in that. So this is kind of, if you haven't seen an Astair Rogers film, you've seen parts of it, most likely pieces of Top Hat.
I mean, you know, the movie is one of those movies that got its hooks into filmmakers that grew up watching it, because, I mean, whatever we can say about Woody Allen, and I'm sure there's many things that can be said from all three of us in different tones and, you know, areas. The guy was a movie fan.
Can't deny that.
Yeah, you can't deny Woody Allen was a movie guy. He grew up with movies, loved movies. And, you know, same with Darabont. You know, Darabont, I mean, clearly, you watch his movies. I mean, the movie that kind of put him in movie jail the first time was The Majestic, a movie about the movies. And then, you know, Shawshank Redemption is, you know, taken from a book, a short story called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. So movies are a big part of that. Green Mile, like we said, has this sequence in it where Michael Clarke Duncan gets to watch it as sort of a gift for being, you know, magic. Yeah, then The Majestic, and the last thing he did was Mob City, which has a lot of Hollywood stuff in it. I mean, you know, this is you see why when you see, I mean, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing, why it would get its hooks into young up and coming filmmakers.
And obviously the Boss Baby also, we should note.
Yes, obviously, you animation watching freak.
Academy Award nominee, The Boss Baby, and The English Patient, and some others. One thing that I think is interesting about this, and it's funny because I guess we'll touch on this now. Kenny, you mentioned Busby Berkeley. One thing I think is very interesting is that this film, and the Astaire Rogers films in general and the ones that follow, because arguably this is kind of the first, I mean, it's the first script written for the two of them. It's also worth noting that their career up until this point, they're not really the stars of these movies. So the first pairing of Astair Rogers is Flying Down to Rio, which is not their movie at all. They are a very secondary part of it. You know, Astaire is the best guy pal, and Rogers is the best gal, and they're the secondary characters in the rom-com, right? It's mostly about this pilot trying to woo this foreign woman, but they're very funny and they click when dancing. People, dig what they're doing. And then you have The Gay Divorcee, which is based on a play that Astaire had done. So they put the two of them in that, and yes, they're front loaded in that, but it wasn't written for the two of them. And it's fine, but it repeats a lot of the same cast that shows up in this. Edward Everett Horton, who plays the best friend in this, was in that. The actor who played the butler or the valet was in Gay Divorcee as well. The actor who plays the Italian was in Gay Divorcee as well. And then their third outing, Roberta, is another case of, it's mainly a showcase for Irene Dunne. People might know from The Awful Truth, playing an opera singer. Again, Astaire and Rogers are kind of secondary, off to the side. One of the things that's interesting is that this film, I think, amongst others, but this film really kind of pivots what people went to a musical movie for.
Yeah.
Because you look at those Busby Berkeley films from earlier, and people admire them, and I think that they're great. And, you know, if you were a kid in the 80s and 90s and you rode the great movie ride in Disney World, you saw the big Busby Berkeley setup, you know the bathing beauties, you know those images. But nobody, people are not, the popular consciousness were not saying, golly, I gotta see Footlight Parade again. You know, you could take those musical numbers, those elaborate Busby Berkeley set pieces, chop them up and put them in That's Entertainment or other montage films, and people were just as satisfied. Top Hat really sort of strips that down. It's a lot more controlled. It's a lot more. I'm not going to sit down and pretend like the plot is a game changer by any means, but there is an effort to, instead of just doing, you watch those films, a lot of those ones Busby Berkeley worked on, the plot is so bare bones, it's just to string together, oh, let's put on a show and musical numbers. Here, there is an attempt to kind of craft a romantic farce amongst these numbers, and I think most importantly, Astair was very forceful in this film about the idea of, he reportedly said when it came to the camera work on this film, either the camera dances or I dance, and I'm going to dance.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of doing like Berkeley did, which was a lot of quick cutting, where sure, it looks impressive if you're sitting down, but you're not really showing anybody's dance skills if you cut from a close-up of a foot kicking to a close-up of a hand to all this stuff. And you watch the dances in this film, and other than the one number that Astaire hated, which is the Piccolino, all of them are essentially just wide shots, basic coverage, and letting you see the dancers do what they're doing, and letting the choreography of Astaire and his co-choreographer Hermes Pan actually tell a story with the dancing itself.
Yeah, that was kind of the thing I noticed. What I kind of latched onto watching this for the first time was how not like kind of loudly a musical it is. It feels kind of stripped down, and there's really like not that many big musical dance scene numbers. Like you've got the big moment that's used in the Green Mile, but like other than that, it's very much about the comic misidentity adventures that's going on with these two. And I also I did find it interesting that like the musical we did last year, Singing in the Rain, it really found itself a hook to allow the musical and dance elements of the movie feel natural to what's happening instead of feeling like it comes out of left field. Like there's a difference between this and Singing in the Rain as compared to say a West Side Story, where there's no reason for these Latin gang members to be dancing and singing. But here, Fred Astaire is a song and dance man, so we have these numbers of him doing his job, and then you the big moment, you're kind of already set into place that this guy literally just cannot stop dancing. That's how he expresses himself. So when he's with Ginger Rogers, yeah, he's gonna dance. He's gonna do his whole romancing with his feet. I found that interesting. How, like you were saying, it strips it down from the Bubsley Berkeley stuff, and really kind of makes it I guess I would say easier to latch onto for audiences. So you take my dad to see it. He's like, I don't want to see fucking dancing, dancing, whatever. You could at least have all this comedy and stuff
Well,
to latch onto.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, Astaire was very big on the idea of. He talked about flow a lot, right? And how you wanted one scene and one moment to flow into the other. That's why he didn't like those kind of choppy dance numbers, and he didn't like. For him, choreography is supposed to transition from one movement to another, right? One sequence to another. So he didn't like things like you see in Piccolino, which is where you go from like, oh, we've got a sideways shot, or we've got a wide shot of all these people dancing past us because it looks impressive, and then we're going to cut to an overhead shot of them dancing in a different position because it looks impressive. Everything had to flow, and that's true of the plot lines as well. By the time we get to Top Hat, him and the director Mark Sandrich and Hermes Pan had a literal chart, a literal graph that they had made up that broke this down into a science of exactly at what minute the Astaire and Rogers characters should meet, at what minute they break apart, how long between each musical number you should have dialogue. They had worked it out to a system because Astaire was so much on the idea of like there's a rhythm to this. It all has to be rhythmic and it all has to flow. Otherwise, doing these musical numbers is going to be jarring, or having a dance breakout here is going to be jarring. So he was very much about trying to treat this, instead of just a musical showcase, actually have a flow going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. A lot of musicals, at least movie musicals, don't really kind of latch onto is that everything around the musical and dance numbers should also have a musicality and a rhythm to it too. So even when you're not singing and dancing, there is this energy propulsing you through the next scene. I mean, that's what I think is so great about last year's movie, Singing in the Rain. I mean, that's a movie that's just straight up like a shot from a bullet. The minute that movie starts, because even like again, that's a movie where there's not as much singing and dancing as you would think there was in an iconic, 80 years later loved movie musical, but it opens with this montage of him growing up and stuff. And you got that stuff here. It moves. There's a rhythm in the dialogue and the way all that stuff works. And, it's 1935. It was going to take somebody who was good at the dancing like Fred Astaire to be like, "Hey, listen, let's show how good I am at dancing and let's get these fucking cameras moving instead of cutting it to garbage." And yeah, you see why it's inducted into the goddamn registry, because somebody had to move the needle and move the idea of how we could film not just movie musicals but movies in general. I mean, cameras are going to start moving more and more as the years go on, because somebody had to figure
So
it out.
I
Well,
think
yeah.
I think these are really, really good points, and I think the point where this is to me essentially a it's like a slingshot, kind of flinging the idea of a movie musical forward. What I think is there are almost two trajectories here. One is this Astaire musical, which I think is the seed that births things like Singing in the Rain and everything we're talking about, all the Broadway musicals that become movies, everything up to now with La La Land. Then the Busby Berkeley stuff, I think, is the stuff that births special effects. And I think that dance is kind of the original special effect, which I think is true in this
Yes.
movie as well, right? But the term I use on Step Up is dance magicians. That I think what we have that no other show has is we have these people who are basically capable of performing magic, and we should be putting that front and center as much as possible. And everything should be serving that idea of how do we get these characters into positions where they can knock our fucking socks off with what they can do. And that's not just the physicality of it, that's the emotionality of it, that is the ability to tell stories with dance. That's our choreographers, that's our directors, and that's everybody who can do these things at it's the like the Rick Baker theory, which is like, yeah, a movie that uses Rick Baker is not going to win Best Picture probably, but he could win for Werewolf in London, right?
Yeah.
So it's we can do what we do better than anyone can do what they do, and I think that's the Astaire thing, right? Astaire and Rogers can do what they do better than anybody else, and I think his thing is get out of the way and let me do it. Put a story around it that anybody could latch onto. This is a story that's been told 100 million times. Every fucking third movie in the 30s had this exact same plot line. But get us to the ball, get us to the part of the movie when you can be kind of wowed by this.
It's like you put it as they're magicians, and that's 100% correct. They're physical magicians, and as any magician knows, like Fred Astaire knows, it's how you visualize and show the audience the trick. Because if you're like one angle off, like 1 degree off on the angle, the magic trick is broken. Same in movies. If you're over editing it, you're breaking the magic trick, because now people are subconsciously thinking, well, they're not actually doing this, they're cutting around
Totally.
it to make it look like they're doing this.
Totally.
And yeah, I mean, it's we dealt with this shit like 15 years ago when Rob Marshall was taking every Broadway musical and filming them and just executing them in front of our eyes, because he just didn't know how to shoot dance sequences. And now people were kind of jumping for joy 2 months ago when In the Heights came out, because it was like, oh my God, they're showing you these fucking people dancing.
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing happened with Step Up in the movies. Same thing is happening with Step Up on television. Get the fuck out of the way and let these people who are more physically impressive than we will ever be if we had 1,000 years to train, and just let
But
them
I,
go.
I I think on top of that, there's one other element to what Astaire and Rogers do that separates them from Busby Berkeley, and I think becomes an important thing for dance going forward, which is not just what they're doing is physically impressive. And honestly, it's the same thing as when you're talking about an action film or a film with a car chase or something like that, which is you can't just show, you can't just have a fight scene in a movie that's just the equivalent of a UFC fight where there's nothing before and nothing after, and you're just watching people punch. A car chase is not impressive if you're just watching the cars drive. The thing that makes their dance scenes work is if you watch a Busby Berkeley number, for the most part, whether it's Footlight Parade or Gold Diggers 1935 or anything like that, it's just numbers. It's just numbers, and the dance has to do with what's being said in the song, where in the money, whatever. With this, what's so important is, for as cookie cutter as the plot can be at times, and as farcical as it can be at times, you need that tension because it's so important that the dance numbers themselves tell a story. Isn't this a lovely night to get caught
Yes.
in the rain? On its own, if that was just a segment on So You Think You Can Dance, you'd go, yeah, I mean, I guess they danced well. That's very good. But it's the fact that it does through the sequential imitation stuff, which is like the bits where he'll do a little jump and then she'll do the same jump, and it's that little like kids sticking their tongue out at each other, copying each other's stuff. You get to watch them fall in love in Isn't This a Lovely Day to Get Caught in the Rain. You watch her forgive him in Cheek to Cheek, and that's a testament not just to the way that it's choreographed and their physicality, but it's also a testament to Ginger Rogers as an actress and how she, with her face, while doing these complex moves with her face, is able to sell the shift in emotion.
Well, I mean, because I said this in the Singing in the Rain episode. The thing that always held me up with movie musicals, at least the ones I saw before I started getting a little more uh, branching out in my taste, is that so many of them don't justify the song and dance numbers. Where you look at this and it's moving the story along. It's not just showing off just to show off. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're just, I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
it's great and all, but
you're yeah, it's elevated. I mean, this is fairly, one-on-one stuff, right? It's of course the goal should be to have everything work in concert. To have the dance inform the story inform the dance, story to be told through dance, that kind of stuff. And I totally agree, and I think I think Singing in the Rain, it does about the best job possible of that. So yeah, I think, and I think that helps audiences kind of get comfortable with the idea. On top of that, I also think that, and I think you do too, Tom. I'm not saying you don't, but I think there's certainly a place for the West Side Story of it, where you
oh
just
yeah,
accept this world.
yeah. Me saying that wasn't so much a criticism of that kind of movie. I'm just saying there are there are the two different kinds. Like this is a very different kind of musical that's kind of grounding its premise into something that audiences can more easily latch onto. Where I mean, there's nothing wrong with a West Side Story that's going to just straight up say like fucking get on the train or you're gonna be lost, you're gonna get trampled under the wheels. But I mean, that's the thing we'll find as we keep going with this shit, is just, I mean, just being a film fan in general, there's 100 ways you could do anything.
Right.
And I mean, Fred Astaire here is kind of breaking free and setting the path of another way for the movie musical.
Well, I mean, and to bring up Singing in the Rain again, I mean, that's kind of when you talk about the dancers in film, right? And you talk about particularly
Yes.
male dancers, your two titans are Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. There's not an argument; those are the
Yes,
two big
indeed.
ones. But they're two very different dancers. As a kid, I was a Gene Kelly fan because Gene Kelly was much more of a modern dancer, right? You watch, you watch that sequence that he he crams into Singing in the Rain, the full modern dance,
The end.
essentially ballet. Well, there's a
fanfare
moment
thing. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, when he shows up and the only way they justify it is he goes, "Wait, I had an idea for another number in the movie," and then they just do it for 10 minutes.
Totally
and then
worth
it never
it.
matters.
It's
It's
totally
great.
worth it.
I love it, and that's
Yeah.
I love it, and I love American in Paris. I loved that as a kid. Whereas Astaire was known for being a much more a much more polished dancer, and also the fact that for the most part he treated the dance numbers in the films kind of the way that he would treat his dance numbers in vaudeville. His origins are in vaudeville. He used to perform with his sister Adele, and in fact, in their stage days, Adele was the more popular of the two, and then he transitioned to film. But he was performing with Adele, and if you look at his numbers in these films, they could be staged without any trouble. The camera does move, and I appreciate the camera work in them, but they're vaudeville performances, whereas you could not do An American in Paris on a stage. I mean, I know they did technically do it on Broadway, but I mean, those numbers
So
require the camera and dolly. Yeah.
I'm very into Top Hat. I'm very into Fred Astaire. I think it's very much of its time because I think you guys do too. But I think what I keep coming back to when it comes to musicals and why I love musicals so much, why I love dance so much in film, and why I love everything from the Busby Berkeleys to In the Heights and everything that kind of came in between is because when it comes down to it, for me, I'm a maximalist.
Yeah.
And I want the most. Now, I don't always want the most, right? Like, of course, I can appreciate a small movie, but small movies, for the most part, are never going to be the ones that stick with me. I mean, there's a reason why I'm always riding for Moulin Rouge, and it's part of it is because it's the most. It is a 15-course meal that I think fits together perfectly in an almost impossible way, and that's why I love Singing in the Rain, and I love that fanfare at the end, about the balletic thing at the end, because it's all worth it to me to show kind of like every tool in your toolbox. To me, the Astaire Rogers musicals are great and thrilling, and their dancing is, unparalleled. But the getting there is very rocky and hard for me to kind of wrap my head around. I go into these things ready to suspend my disbelief, and I don't need to be terrestrial in this stuff. So that's
Yeah, I mean, the very idea of a movie musical is a maximalist idea.
right.
And with movies, you're already dealing with the unreality, so why not completely lean into the unreality? And I get that. I think at the end of the day, I'm gonna always ride for Singing in the Rain over this because that one is a bigger, more lavish affair that's really just kind of blasting you in the face with a 12 gauge round of nonsense. And also just with my brief flirtations with Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire, I'm gonna lean with Gene Kelly, not just for the physicality of Gene Kelly, but also because he looks like he's the kind of guy who could beat somebody up at a bar, and Fred Astaire looks like he's getting shoved into lockers. So I'm always gonna ride for Gene Kelly in that regard. The guy who looks like if James Caan and Seth MacFarlane had a baby.
Here's what I'll say. I think the Top Hat, to me, one of the things that makes Top Hat impressive over some of the other films is that by having that musical number at the end, not the end, the Piccolino, the kind of forced big Berkeley-esque number, I think that for me that makes me appreciate their more pared down one-on-one dance numbers a lot more, because I think it's easy enough to look at Fred and Ginger dancing to cheek and have that temptation to go, well, but what if there were 50 people doing it? But then you watch that Piccolino sequence in the end, and it feels so lifeless. And I think that part of what's important about Fred and Ginger, and why it is Fred and Ginger, why it is Astaire and Rogers when we talk about this, is the fact that it is the extraordinary chemistry that they have, and that I would argue that particularly in a thing like Cheek to Cheek, or even, just Astaire and his backup dancers in Top Hat and Tails, I think that there is an energy that even though it's two people in Cheek to Cheek, the two of them have the energy of a 50-person musical number in Gold Diggers in 1933. I mean, and it's not just because Astaire was such a precise choreographer, and he was very conscious about how his body would look while he was dancing. But to the credit of Ginger Rogers, and, people always talk about, like Kenny said, the backwards and heels thing, but there's more to it than that, because Ginger Rogers was also selecting her own costumes with an idea toward, how will this dress move when we're doing the dances? How will this be visually impressive? And I'm assuming, I don't know how much you guys looked into it. Do you guys know about the infamous cheek-to-cheek dress?
I don't.
No, I do not. Enlighten us.
Astair hated that dress vehemently. So Rogers designed this dress. The cheek number is her in this big feather-covered dress, right?
Great dress.
And
Astair was wrong.
well, that's the thing. Astair hated it. Director Mark Sanders hated it. But if I may quote Ginger here, and I'm pulling from one of the books I picked up, I'll cite it later. I was determined to wear this dress come hell or high water, and why not? It moved beautifully. Obviously, no one in the cast or crew was willing to take sides, particularly not my side. This was all right with me. I'd had to stand alone before. At least my mother was there to support me in the confrontation with the entire front office, plus Fred Astaire and Mark Sandrich. Now, it's worth noting, Astaire did not see the dress for the first time until the day of the shoot. Hated it, and his big problem with it was that when they moved, some of the feathers came off. And he didn't like that. These feathers were flying around. It screwed up a lot of things for him. Later, they watched it back, and he realized that made the sequence better. And as an apology, Astaire and his choreography partner, Hermes Pan, bought Rogers a gold feather charm for her charm bracelet. But my favorite is that later during a different, I think it was during the rap or something like that, Astaire leaned over to her and sang cheek to cheek with new lyrics that said, "Feathers, I hate feathers, and I hate them so that I can hardly speak." So, and later his nickname for her became Feathers. It was a point of like a lot of tension for them, this dress. But what I think is so important is that Fred was wrong. That even though he envisioned this choreography one way, Ginger was able to look at it and see what dress that needed. She was very conscious for costumes and how they would look on screen, which I think is something she doesn't get enough credit for when we talk about.
Couple things. You have a better voice than Fred Astaire. No question. I think that I read somewhere else too, and I think this is true. Tom brought up what a geek Fred Astaire looks like. And I think somewhat famously, he did his test at, I think it was MGM, and they said he can't sing, can't act, balding, can dance a little. And I think Astaire said, no, it was just that they said I can't act, and I also dance. And I'm going bald. And, he's no Gene Kelly, physically. Like, he's just, like, that's obvious. He doesn't have Gene Kelly's face, he doesn't have Gene Kelly's muscles, he doesn't have Gene Kelly's presence. And what I read, I don't know where, but I think it might have been Pauline Kaeley said it, or maybe Jen Maslin, that Ginger is the one who made Fred Astaire a sex symbol.
Well, it's Katharine Hepburn has that quote.
I think that's a different quote, but
okay.
There is a quote Katharine Hepburn had too, but maybe it was the idea that it's the way that Ginger looks at Fred that makes women swoon, makes women want to be him. So maybe it was Katharine Hepburn. You're right.
Hepburn was the one who said Fred gave Ginger class, Ginger gave Fred sex.
Okay, so that's a variation on the same theme. I think it was Maslin or Kaeley who basically said, Ginger doesn't get enough credit for making women want to be in that position, making it feel like being, chased after and being with Fred Astaire, dancing with Fred Astaire is the most wonderful thing in the entire world. And we see this all the time in Hollywood with unusual, atypical male sex symbols, but I don't think we give enough credit to the co-stars who sell the idea that this 140-pound geek is the world's most attractive man, which I think she does really well.
Well, it's the people never give the straight man the credit where credit's due. I mean, haven't gone through all the Abbott and Costello stuff. I mean, Costello isn't as great without Abbott giving him that straight man reactions and slapping him right in the face. You need Ginger Rogers to sell the fact that he looks like his own caricature.
He does.
He looks like his own Looney Tune. And
he looks like he was an Al Hirschfeld, and he should be on the wall of the Palm.
I mean, he absolutely has the face for a vaudeville performer. But Ginger Rogers is, listen, without them, she's the glue that's holding it all together. I mean, it kind of goes without saying. And watching this movie, I mean, there's two things that really make this movie, I think, easy to watch, and it's those two, Ginger and Fred. Obviously, they've got the chemistry, they've got the moves. It's all great. The other thing that made me enjoy watching this movie is almost none of the other performers were doing anything for me except for Helen Broderick as Madge, the woman who
Awesome.
is completely like, oh, my husband's
Amazing.
trying to fuck you. What else is new? It's like,
well, at least he's getting some exercise.
That's
Yeah.
that's what makes the fun, the absolute. I mean, because that's the thing, I do still laugh at this movie. Even though
yeah, it's got good bits.
She was
the best
fantastic.
bit is just, you do these mistaken identity things all the time, right? But just the idea
Yes.
that it's 1935, a very buttoned up time, and you have this scene where Ginger Rogers, right before Cheek to Cheek, where they're at dinner, Fred Astaire shows up, and Ginger Rogers is like, oh, well, now his wife's going to give him the business. And she just goes, well, you two have met. Well, I'm glad. You two go have fun. And Ginger Rogers has to, I mean, like, people forget, we love Cheek to Cheek. It's an incredible number. It's used in so many movies. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize when they see it in other films that it's not just that she's falling in love with him. It's that, for argument's sake, she's falling in love with him in spite of the fact that he's essentially a married man inviting her to join a polycule in his mind, or in her mind, that she's got this weird thing to overcome.
I mean, this movie is pretty pretty ballsy
yeah.
with that kind of content. I mean, there was one bit that kind of knocked me for a loop with me going, holy shit, this is 1935, which is the scene where Fred Astaire and Edward Everett Horton are like, they're gonna go to they get in the hotel room where they go to, what is it, Italy? They go to Venice.
Yeah.
And we got the
bridal suite,
the honeymoon suite, the bridal suite. But then there's the part where it's like, oh, we got to take you out of the bridal suite, and he just looks at Edward Everett Horton and is like, oh, is that okay with you, sweetie? And like gives him a little, like, goes, mwah. And it's like, Jesus, whoa, what is depression era nut jobs thinking about watching this shit?
There's my favorite joke that I didn't pick up on when I was young. Toward the end, when Astaire goes into the suite, that the bridal suite, right, where the Italian is. And somebody they go, oh, you can't be in here. It isn't cricket. And Astaire goes, it isn't tiddlywinks either. And I realized, like, watching it, listening to the commentary, that's a joke in part because tiddlywinks sounds like you're referring to genitals. Like, it sounds like tits. It sounds a little raunchy. And it's just so fun anytime you watch one of these old films and realize, oh, they were sneaking stuff in. They were getting it in there.
Yeah. This is pre-code though, right?
The motion picture code?
Yeah.
I don't. 35?
Ooh, when was the code?
Now I gotta check.
Installed?
No, so pre-code, that's 1929. 1930, I
That's
should say. Right?
1930.
Yeah.
So all right, well there you go. So that this is
Yeah.
All right, so I've gone on this rant on my my podcast, which is essentially in modern times, the need for allegory is moot, more or less. And anybody who's using allegory at this point is just doing it to show. I don't mean that as a 100% blanket generalization, but it's not the same. It's not the same when you literally couldn't say things, and you had to dance around things and dance around ideas and incept or Trojan horse ideas. And I think that stuff is interesting to me. The idea, like, so much of our notion of like the sexless 30s, the sexless 50s, and what a quote unquote like revolution it was for people to watch Mad Men, which I think Mad Men is an amazing show, but not because they showed characters having sex.
That's
comes from. What's that?
Oh, I was gonna say, no, that's not revolutionary. Half of Peter Bogdanovich's career is just making movies going, did you know people did it in old times? Yeah, okay, great. Good job.
Right. Exactly. And the reason Peter Bogdanovich can say that to people is because of the code, right? So it is always fun to see to catch these little things, like almost like pull these little things out, in these little little winks to we were fucking too.
I think that's so crucial to this film too. Not just because of the bawdiness, but one of the things that we've lost in modern day, because, like you're saying, Kenny, we don't have to imply anything anymore. in film school, one of the things they teach you early on at least in our film school, like we weren't allowed to use sound for the first like 2 years. And the idea was to teach us the idea of show, don't tell, and to express things visually. I think to that same degree, older audiences were better at drawing the implication from things. Older audiences were better at even stuff that we may now call on the nose, but like drawing the implication from little inflections and little cues. The joke in it, the great joke in It Happened One Night, when Gable and Claudette Colbert put the blanket up between them, call it the Wall of Jericho, and then at the end when they decide they're gonna fuck, they they play a trumpet, to tumble. Like that kind of stuff is great. I think that modern audiences have lost the ability to some degree or another, because everything is shown and everything is literal to some degree.
Oh yeah.
Lost the ability to follow certain visual things, and not just the jokes, but I think about when musicals come out now, how many people call numbers superfluous that absolutely aren't, because they're just not seeing what they're doing. A number that gets copied almost verbatim is, "Isn't it a lovely day to get caught in the rain," which is my favorite number in the movie. It doesn't take much imagination to realize that "Isn't it a lovely day to get caught in the rain" in decades gets translated to "What a waste of a lovely night" in La La Land, right? It's the same number. It's them doing the imitation step. But I just remember that, like, when I saw La La Land, the person I saw La La Land with, I was like, that number was wonderful. I had so much fun with it. And they were like, why did you have to sing it? You could have just said that in like 3 words. And I'm like, yeah, you could have. But
well, that
no,
person's
but my
no
point,
fun.
but the point is, like, with Isn't It a Lovely Day, like, you watch it and yeah, you could just turn your brain off and go, oh, that's singing and dancing, whatever. But if you're watching that sequence, it's telling you the story. And so I kind of wanted to ask Kenny, when it comes to, if we can pivot a little bit to what you do on your show as a writer, what is the, because dancing in a dance number, is a way of telling a story, and just as much as dialogue, conveying emotions. What's the process like for you as a writer to kind of determine sort of when a dance number comes in and how you convey that information? Like when is something best told with words and when is something best told with movement, is what I mean.
It's a good question. So to pull back a little bit, our show takes place within what's essentially, this is not technically what it is, but it's essentially a finishing school / academy for young people who are trying to be in media, right? And we focus on the dance component of that. And so we have a lot of these, I guess I can kind of call it almost like, bear with me, almost like diegetic dancing, right? Where people are practicing, where people are performing on stage, where people are, auditioning. And we tell stories through that, of course. You're telling stories of rivalries, you're telling stories of competition, you're telling stories of confidence or whatever it is. Then we also have some of these flights of fancy type dancing, where 2 characters will dance in an apartment, or they'll dance at a train station, or they'll dance on the sidewalk, or they'll dance wherever it is. It's never like Gene Kelly at the end of Singing in the Rain, where it's in characters' minds. It's always happening in real life, but it's stuff that if you saw it in real life, you would stop and say, what in the world is happening? Whereas in our show, sometimes background people will just join in, right? And so in terms of when do we decide when a story is best told through dance and through, dialogue or action or whatever, it mostly comes down to, frankly, the characters and how they would express themselves. And for the most part, if something can be expressed through dance, we do it, right? So if you have 2 characters who are in love or who are falling out of love, and there's an opportunity to get them dancing and tell the story that way, we will always kind of default to that. But we also have like a pretty heavy crime element in our show, and we would never marry those 2 worlds, right? Like the idea of drug dealers dancing in the middle of a drug deal is just, it would kill the reality of the show.
It worked great for Cop
So.
Rock, but
Right. Well, it worked great for like West Side Story, right? Like there are ways to do this stuff
Yes,
for sure. And
but
go
West
ahead.
Side Story is kind of whittling down the reality of street gangs, so you're not really getting into the nitty gritty of, well, how are these guys making? Oh, they're drug dealers and they're pimps, and they kill old women to steal their purses. It's like, okay, they're a street gang, and what do? They dance. Okay, yeah, that's about as
Now,
far as the reality
now,
goes.
Kenny, let me ask on this note: what is, if I may, we've already talked about your background with singing, but with regard to working on this show, and if not, do you have any background in dance yourself, or is that something that you kind of had to learn while doing this?
Virtually none, right? Like virtually none. I have found, look, I come from Entourage. So when there are things or shows, movies that are in and around, they're set in and around media, entertainment, that's kind of when I can go in and meet on them, right? And Step Up was one of these shows, which ultimately, we were kind of centered, as I said, around a school or an academy, but our main character is Neo, and he's kind of playing a version of himself, but with a lot of Kanye. So there is this bigger thing going on, right? There's this bigger thing. So in terms of me, look, I didn't know much. I wasn't brought in any way to, speak to the dance of it. And I kind of learned on the fly. In terms of how the dance gets from the writer's room to the final product, we lean a lot on our choreographer, Jamaica Craft, who is, just a incredible Atlanta-based hip hop dancer and choreographer. And a lot of it is done in Atlanta, where we shoot after the script's written, with the writer of that script and the producers, and Jamaica, and also often the dancers. I mean, she has a team of 4 choreographers, so whoever is whoever is choreographing that particular episode will be involved. But yeah, I don't have almost I none, basically, is the answer before I did this. Now I've been doing this for a while.
Now, I bring this up just because I was reading about how Astair notably, obviously they would get the script, and with this script in particular, Astair hated it. He first and foremost felt it was patterned too closely to the gay divorcee, and felt that he was cast as an objectionable young man with no charm or sympathy or humor, and just ripped it apart. But one of the key things is not only did he get involved in trying to get that story better, but he spent 6 weeks with his partner Hermes Pan choreographing before he would even allow the director on set. Right? He had that much control. That got me thinking about, because you talked about handing it over to the choreographer, what is the feeling like for you as a writer of these kind of things? Because obviously, when you're writing something else, when you're writing something that is just a straight dialogue based story like an Entourage or what have you, when you're writing something like that, you're obviously taking a character entirely from point A to point B with your writing. What does it feel like to kind of what's the process like to sort of hand off a scene and entrust to somebody else the idea of, hey, I'm leaving, there's this space here where this character has to get from point A to point B, and you kind of have to tell that story in movement. How does that work for you? How do you feel when that happens?
It's a great question. And one that, fortunately, I don't I this is going to sound like bullshit, but it's true. I don't have to think about that much, because like I have just all the faith in the world in Jamaica. And so does our whole staff. Like I've never seen her or her team get a piece, which is essentially, in the script, we write the dialogue and the action up until the dance, and then we have a block of basically a paragraph of, this is what we are trying to accomplish in this scene, in this dance, right? Over the course of this dance, we want these things to happen. Some of them are physical, like, A drops B, and some of them are emotional, like, A has to feel like she's not as good as B, right? That kind of stuff. And we hand it over, and they take that paragraph and turn it into a 2 or 3 minute piece, and it's always better than we imagined. So if we were in a situation where we couldn't trust our choreographer, it would be different and bad and very uncomfortable. Like, and I've worked, every writer's worked with directors that you don't really trust, and it would be similar to that you just kind of have to accept that the process, your part of the process ends once shooting begins, which is true. That's DGA stuff. Like I don't know if you guys know this, on set, writers are not even allowed to talk. You have to send all your communication through the director. And when they're dancing, you have to send all the communication through the choreographer. But we're very lucky. Like, she really, really elevates the show when it comes to that stuff.
All right, so let me ask, because this is a question I've been meaning to ask. What is everyone? What is your favorite number in this movie?
In this movie?
In Top Hat, yes. Your favorite of all the numbers of all the songs and dances in this film. What's your favorite?
Mine is the same as yours. Isn't it
a lovely day to get caught in the rain?
One, the one under the gazebo. I love that one, and I think that's great.
Listen, I'm a basic bitch. It's I'm in heaven.
Cheek to cheek.
I mean, I don't know what I don't know what to tell you. I'm a basic bitch. I'm a simple boy living in a lonely world. Now,
Tom, would it change your mind to know that your boy Buster Keaton did do a parody of a different dance number from Top Hat in one of his films?
I mean, it wouldn't change things, but it would certainly interest me.
He did. This is in because Top Hat was a huge hit. This is an important thing to note. Top Hat was a massive hit. Let me see. I have the number written down here.
Didn't even have an HBO Max release. Look at that.
In the midst of the Great Depression, Top Hat was produced on a budget of $609,000, which was over $12 million today. It grossed $3.2 million, or $63,461,000 and so on dollars today. Adjusted for inflation, that's the biggest hit the pair ever has. So it was a massive hit.
It's a good return.
The very next year, Buster Keaton. Do you remember the first number in the movie, No Strings, which is Astair tap dancing and he wakes up Ginger? Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, in Buster Keaton's film Grand Slam Opera, which is a talkie film, 36, he does the same thing, except the gag is that he's in this rundown working class apartment as opposed to this fancy hotel. So when he is dancing around, instead of being able to leap on the bed and bounce right off, the bed collapses. Shit's just breaking all over the place. And then when the girl comes up and he decides he's going to be romantic and do the tap dance, instead of Astair taking a handful of sand out of the ashtray and spreading it and doing an elegant dance, Buster Keaton grabs the fire bucket full of sand, dumps it out, and there's a half-lit cigar or a half-smoked cigar sitting in there. It's a fun gag. But yeah, my favorite is Lovely Night. I mean, I do love No Strings because I do think there's something very... Part of the problem with a lot of these farce films from the 30s is that you essentially have two people meet, lock eyes, and they're in love with each other. And they want to get married, right? What I think is so great about the first meeting of Fred and Ginger in this during that No Strings sequence is that she doesn't meet him and immediately go like, I found the man I'm going to marry. She thinks he's cute. She thinks he's being kind of a dick, but she thinks he's cute, and he thinks she's cute. And she goes downstairs, and then he starts doing the very charming kind of tap on the sand, and it's like,
I love that.
You can tell she's swooning a little bit. She's not gonna marry him immediately, but there is this feeling that's a little more natural to, like, Kenny, you talked about how he's not a traditionally good-looking man, and how Ginger sells that. I think part of that is that, it'd be different if he walked onto the scene and she was immediately like, oh my God. To bring it back to Singing Rain again, when Don Lockwood shows up, he's so gorgeous, he expects every woman to be falling over themselves for him. Whereas it's in this film, she falls for him because he's so charming that even when she thinks he's a married man, and his wife is chill with it, Cheek to Cheek wins her over because he is just so gosh darn charming.
Yeah,
it's funny. I feel like this is where I split from the crowd, because I just think he was an absolute fucking asshole the entire movie.
Yeah.
I'm not. Listen. I don't know. That's just me. I thought he was kind of a dick, but
I
whatever.
trust that if you watch their next film, Tom, Follow That Fleet, where his companion is a monkey in a sailor suit, I feel like you'll be more on board for that.
Well, listen. Every Which Way But Loose, but with dancing is fine in my. It's funny though. I literally, after I watched this movie, I think about a few days later, I watched the Hitchcock movie, The Lady Vanishes, and it has like essentially the same inciting, like, romantic incident as this, where what the fuck is his name? I forget. But the main guy in that is a musician, and he's playing his music too goddamn loud, waking the main female lead up, bothering each other, and then away we go. Which hey, there's only like 7 ideas in cinema, so what are you gonna do?
I also want to take a moment, because we talked about I mean, it's worth asking for the audience's sake, because I asked Kenny your background in dance. Tom, what is your background in dance?
I get drunk and go to mosh pits.
Yeah, I felt like I just wanted everybody's bases covered. Now, for me, I will admit this. I did tap for a number of years when I was younger, because I was doing all the musicals in school, and I idolized Gene Kelly. So I took tap dancing classes, and I will tell you right now, watching some of the things Fred Astaire does in particularly the No Strings number, and also White Top Hat and Tails, my ankles literally hurt. You know how some people who used to be like athletes in high school, like when they watch football on TV and somebody gets hit, they feel it.
Yeah.
I truly felt it in my ankles at points at some of the things some of the things that he does, and makes it look so effortless. I mean, there is this, it's kind of like we were talking about. I mean, this will be out later, but one of the things we talked about with recently with the Olympics and everything going on is a lot of people talking about gymnastics and how we don't appreciate how difficult that is, because
how fucking dangerous
how dangerous
it is.
and how difficult it is, because they make it look so easy, right? They have to make it look effortless, and so much of that is true for dance, especially tap. I mean, the one thing you see Fred Astaire do a lot, where he basically sweeps his, for argument's sake, sweeps his right leg in front of his left and then leaps over his ankle. I mean, you do that at the wrong angle, you've broken your ankle just easily. It is such a ridiculously, it is such a damaging thing to do, and to see that he does it so lighter than air. I mean, think about that Top Hat and Tails number, right? Which is arguably the only number in the movie that is kind of this is just a number that's happening. That's not super story based. It's still, an incredible number. I loved, his, obviously him using the cane and tapping his heels to make it look like he's shooting everyone on stage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which actually came from an old 30s routine that he had done on stage with a different number. I believe he was in a show called Smile. And the number I believe that he had done that in, most of the same choreography, was called You Young Man of Manhattan, I think. I don't know why I remember that without reading it, but it's there. And when he went, because he was friends with Irving Berlin, one of America's greatest songwriters, who did the songs to the film. When he went to Irving Berlin, he was like, I want a song to do this number too. And Irving Berlin just happened to have White Tie, Top Hat, and Tails sitting around. I was like, try this. And sure enough, because of this film, it went on to be a massive hit. That's another thing worth noting. All 5 songs from this movie were hits when they came out. They were topping the charts, and have had a legacy. I mean, Cheek to Cheek was voted the number 15 greatest movie song of all time by the AFI, which is the highest ranked of any of Astaire and Rogers' songs. It's had this rich legacy that I think is fascinating, and yet did not win the Oscar. Just pointing that out. Cheek to Cheek lost, which baffles me. That's my transition to. Did anybody else have anything to say before we transition into how Top Hat fared at the Oscars?
I think I'm about tapped out.
How did it do with the Oscars?
Top Hat was nominated for Best Picture alongside Alice Adams, Broadway Melody of 1936, Captain Blood, David Copperfield, The Informer, The Lives of a Bengal Lancer, Midsummer Night's Dream, Les Miserables, Naughty Marietta, Ruggles of Red Gap, and the winner, Mutiny on the Bounty. I want to point out that The Informer, Naughty Marietta, and Ruggles of Red Gap are also all in the National Film Registry, so we'll be covering those fellow nominees at some point. It was
Mutiny year 1?
Mutiny on the Bounty is not in the registry yet.
Come on,
right?
Weird.
I had the exact same thought. Yeah, that's insane. It was nominated for Best Original Song for Cheek to Cheek, but it lost to Lullaby of Broadway from Gold Diggers of 1935. It was nominated for Best Art Direction, but lost. What?
That's a song that has persevered as well.
It has.
I'm not saying that it's cheek to cheek, but
no. I will get into my thoughts on how that win happened. But Best Art. It was nominated for Best Art Direction, lost to The Dark Angel, and it was nominated for Best Dance Direction, but lost to both the Broadway Melody of 1936 and Folie Bergère du Paris, the latter of which is a Maurice Chevalier music. It's worth noting this is also the year of The Bride of Frankenstein, which got a nomination
Yes,
for Best
I was
Cinematography.
just gonna say the best movie of the year, not even fucking nominated for Best Picture.
Here's a little Oscar trivia for y'all. This also appears to be the year that inspires the idea of Best Supporting Actor and Best Supporting Actress. The Academy Awards up until the 8th Academy Awards had only actor and actress. As a result, from Mutiny on the Bounty, Clark Gable, Charles Lawton, and Franchot Tone all get nominated for Best Actor, but presumably cancel each other out, and Victor McLaglen wins Best Actor for The Informer. The very next year at the 9th Academy Awards, suddenly there's a Supporting Actor and Supporting Actress category. I have to imagine this was a factor in that. Also worth noting, this was a banner year for Charles Lawton. He's in Mutiny on the Bounty, Les Miserables, and Ruggles of Red Gap. So good for you.
Also, hey, how about this? Give a little shout out to Paul Mooney for Black Fury, the
Yes!
write-in candidate,
Winning as
who
a write-in
came in
candidate.
second on the final ballots. It was not an official nomination. Paul Mooney coming in and telling everyone from Mutiny on the Bounty to go fuck themselves.
Extra trivia. Do you know who else came into the 8th Academy Awards and told everyone to go fuck themselves?
Can't wait to hear.
Technically Norman Maine, because the 8th Academy Awards is the fictionalized award show that Vicki Lester wins Best Actress at in the 1937 Star is Born, and a drunk Norman Lester shows up and starts making a scene. So the Top Hat Oscars, the 1935 Oscars, is the Oscars that Vicki Lester supposedly wins Best Actress at. Of course, at this Oscars, that honor went to Bette Davis. But the crucial element here, I think, is Cheek to Cheek losing to Lullaby of Broadway. I have a theory as to why that won. Kenny, you mentioned that song has also endured. What are your thoughts on Lullaby of Broadway?
It's a song I'm aware of.
Tom, do you know Lullaby of Broadway?
I don't even know the words you're saying to me right now.
It's like,
Come on along and listen to the Lullaby of Broadway.
Why are you all yelling at me right now?
We are singing at you.
Kenny and I are planning a duet show soon. That's what's going to happen. We're going off to tour the country doing old standards. You and Phil will talk about movies from 1999 to cover. That's the plan, right?
Phil would not be happy with that.
Tom, what are your thoughts on The Girl on the Bridge? I don't know. Fine. All right. See you guys next week. Okay, but my thing is, one thing that people forget about the Best Original Song category is that, at least now, and I'm sure it was at the time too, you don't judge just based on an isolated song, right? It's not an MP3. You're watching the scene in the movie. Lullaby of Broadway, which appears in Gold Digger's 1935, and the same year also appeared in Bette Davis's Special Agent and James Cagney's The G-Men. So it's in 3 different movies. You were hearing it all the time, and it is an elaborate Busby Berkeley number in Gold Digger's 1935. It is a lavish number. So I think it's one of those things where if you are looking at scenes, especially these scenes isolated, Lullaby of Broadway is a knockout showstopper, and Cheek to Cheek without the film around it might just seem like, yeah, it's some nice dancing, whatever. And I think that might have hurt its chances. There's also an element of the year prior, The Gay Divorcee, which is an Astair Rogers film, won Best Original Song for The Continental. They might have been trying to spread the wealth. But for my money,
I think that was a very good theory, Mike. I think you're probably right.
Yeah, for my money, Cheek to Cheek is the better song and the better. That's just. But I'm so glad we got the chance to talk about this. I think that the Astair Rogers thing is such an enduring iconography. Also worth noting for anybody who wondered, yes, Ginger Rogers did win an Oscar just a couple years later for a movie called Kitty Foyle, and Fred Astaire would get nominated for showing up in Towering Inferno.
His only nomination.
Yep. He just kind of shows up, and I don't know. Those 70s disaster movies are weird. Towering Inferno, not in the registry. Shocker. Those are the ones I always...
I'm a little surprised.
Are
any of those in the registry?
No. Nope.
No.
No.
All right.
Maybe
Kenny, we got a job to do.
I could see
Airport, Poseidon.
I was gonna say I could see Poseidon Adventure maybe one day getting it. Towering Inferno.
Towering Inferno was nominated for Best Picture.
It was.
Were any of the others? Was it Airport?
Airport was
right?
Airport 77, I think gets or 70 whatever it was. The sequel. What was it? Airport
I don't know,
whatever. The
there's
sequel
like
gets
4
one.
sequels.
Yeah, there's a lot. But Towering Inferno was the one that I think that's in the same year as Chinatown and The Godfather Part 2.
I was gonna say it's a really great year,
Those-
except for
Well,
Towering
that's
Inferno.
I not to get too off track, but those disaster movies are the thing I always point to whenever you see people on Twitter who think they know movies but don't. Always go like, "Man, I wish we could go back to the 70s. That was the best time for movies." And it's like, yeah, there were a lot of great movies coming out. Look at the box office. You're gonna see things you don't. You're gonna look at that and go, "The fuck was Gus the field goal kicking mule?" I don't know, but it was the 8th highest grossing film of the year.
Hey, listen, you say that name, I'm intrigued. All right.
Actually, it's
Yeah.
it's on Disney Plus. It's Don Knotts and
Say,
yeah.
let's reboot it.
It's just the most. It's Don Knotts' football team is struggling, so he wants a better kicker.
Does he get an Italian?
No, he gets. Here's the best part. He gets a mule because he finds out that in I forget what country. I think it's Peru or something. There's a mule that kicks soccer balls really well, and he goes, "Could we translate that to football?" And
Listen,
that's
there's
the
nothing
movie.
in the rule book that says a mule can't kick
It's-
field goals.
No, it's a reverse Ted Lasso. We love it. It's great. But yeah,
Reverse Ted
real
Lasso.
fast,
yeah,
Mike.
sure.
Do you know the other 2 movies nominated that year? It was 74.
It was
They
74.
are-
So it's hang on. So it's Towering Inferno, it's Lenny, it's Chinatown, it's Godfather Part 2, and Son of a Bitch. Is it no, it's not The Conversation, is it? No.
Is the conversation?
It's Conversation. Okay, yeah. There we go.
Yep. What a year.
Lenny was
these-
nominated.
Lenny was nominated for
The
Best
nom-
Picture, my friend.
That movie sucks.
We'll
like
talk
it a
about
lot.
policy some other time.
Anyway, yes.
Um,
One thing I want to note. I'm sorry, Kenny, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I got nothing.
One last thing I want to note before we send you off, Kenny, and I will spice it whatever. But I'm so glad you were here for this. Ginger, Fred and Ginger are so iconic. I recently watched, and if anybody has a chance to check it out, one of Federico Fellini's last films was an homage to Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers called Ginger and Fred, which was a criticism of Berlusconi's TV networks in Italy at the time. And his last film with Marcello Mastroianni, his last film with his wife, Giulietta Messina. And if people get a chance to check it out, there's an extraordinary number where Marcello and Messina are basically playing people in their 60s who used to impersonate Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers in Italy, now having to do cheek to cheek again. It's an extraordinary thing, and just kind of shows how this movie from 1935 could endure and be transmuted in so many ways that cheek to cheek could mean something 50 years later in a country an ocean away. And if that doesn't say why this film deserves to be in the registry, I don't know what does. So, Kenny, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, friend.
For sure, guys. Love it. Love coming on this podcast. Whenever you guys want me, I'm here. Someone drops out, let me know.
Do you have anything you want to plug on your way out?
I don't know when this is dropping, but Step Up might be on Stars at that point if you have Stars. And if you have Stars, it's available on demand. The show is good, I promise. It's like very good aside from the dance magicians. I 100% would say it was not good if it wasn't.
So thank you so much for that. And folks can check out podcasts like It's 1999 wherever they get their podcasts. And you guys have a Patreon feed. You are, as of now, going through the films of 1989, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tom and I have had a privilege of being on both feeds. Tom's 89 film is... Oh, you were Tango and Cash. Right?
Tango and Cash.
Tom did Tango and Cash. I did Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It shouldn't surprise anybody.
No.
And we'd love to have you all back for the slasher
Oh
trilogy.
yeah,
which
I'm
I think
pushing.
we're gonna-
I'm pushing big for the slasher trilogy. I know Phil won't watch all the movies before those entries, but you said you would, and I can't wait to just dive deep into those nonsense films.
When all of the things that I'm pitching don't get bought, and then I have nothing to do, I will 100% spend a week just bathing in the world of Freddy, Jason, and Michael.
So, Kenny, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Everybody stick around. We'll be back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members like Martin Scorsese, Alfred Woodard, and Leonard Maltin, and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and us, who can submit their nominations for the registry in a form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of each episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration, on behalf of You're Missing Out. Here are today's picks.
Okay, so, shocker upon shocker, I've got another wild card this week that I think actually fits. I'm not being a jerk. So, as in our discussion of the episode of Top Hat, we were discussing about how it, it was like a fulcrum point. It changed the way movie musicals could be. It was very visionary for its time. All that stuff. It was a game changer. And I was just thinking about the connections between the movie musical and the action movie, and I was thinking about a filmmaker that, for better or worse, depending on where you fall on this line, on this filmmaker, changed action cinema in a very fundamental way. And I looked back at his first movie and how that shift was almost immediate. Nobody had seen anything like it, and people were chasing it the second it came out. And I think it's kind of surprising, actually. Not really, but kind of surprising. Uber American auteur Michael Bay is not in the registry, and for that reason, I am putting Bad Boys in, not just for all of that, but also because it too is a mistaken identity movie, dancing around Martin Lawrence pretending to be Will Smith and Will Smith pretending to be Martin Lawrence because of the hot white woman in the middle of the movie that is kind of the focal point of the plot. And for its fun way of taking the mistaken identity aspect, almost romantic aspect of Top Hat, taking the action game-changing elements of Bad Boys, I am formally submitting Bad Boys, 1995's Michael Bay explosion onto the scene, into the National Film Registry.
I can't. You made the case. There's no argument. You made the case.
Listen. Sometimes I do my homework.
So, my pick goes in the opposite direction, and by that I mean 100 years in the opposite direction from Tom's pick. Tom, your film was from 1995, correct?
That is indeed correct, sir.
How about we talk about 1895? So, as we talked about in our episode, the dance film, the idea of a dance film has existed for almost as long as we've had movies because dance does not require, it's a visual art form. That got me thinking about the earliest dance films. And then certain things you do kind of, there were a lot of silent shorts and snippets that had dance, but the one that I think everybody knows and has seen reused 1,000 times is not in the registry, which is Annabelle's Serpentine Dance. It's from 1895. It was produced and distributed by the Edison Manufacturing Company. It was dancer Annabelle Moore. She would wear this long flowing skirt, long flowing dress with butterfly wings, waving it around, wings in her hair, making this skirt flutter around like butterflies' wings, or it was called a serpentine dance because of the movement. What's fascinating about Annabelle's Serpentine Dance, besides the fact that it is just this visually impressive thing with the dress flowing in much the manner that Ginger Rogers understood how her feather dress would appear on screen. This is an understanding of how this movement would be captivating. It's also interesting because, of course, it was directed by William K.L. Dixon, early filmmakers before we had the idea of a director. But the most interesting thing about Annabelle's Serpentine Dance is that most versions you see of it are in color in 1895, well before we had the idea of 3-short Technicolor or anything like that, because these prints, when they would be distributed, were all hand tinted. So you can see a color short from 1895 because the Edison Company went to the effort of hand tinting them. So I think if we are going to talk about dance on film and the history of dance on film, while Top Hat is a pivotal piece of that, I think you have to go all the way back to 1895's Annabelle's Serpentine Dance. Absolutely should be in the National Film Registry.
Let's all go to the lobby.
Thank you again to Kenny Neibart. Next week, it's all aboard the quintessential action movie. Mike Scott from the Action for Everyone podcast joins us for the Great Train Robbery. Make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on future episodes. Follow the show on Twitter at YMO Podcast. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Here on You're Missing Out.
They honor movies of historical, cultural, or aesthetic importance on the National Film Registry.